Hello, welcome to Mandibil, and welcome to my first Ask Me Anything video where I actually attempt to directly answer my listeners' questions, or listeners, however you want to, you know, describe yourself. Um, and I have taken the liberty to when in chat discussions either on the board or in the comment sections below videos, if there's a question there, I have sort of copy pasted it into my list of questions for my Ask Me Anything list. If I feel that it would be better to take it that way, sometimes it can feel a bit like notch to Robert Roest. That it can be a little too elaborate to have very long, comment in the comment section of the videos. That creates sort of. I think that comments should be comments and not dissertations of philosophy. If you want to go deeper, please head into the Discord board so we can sort of keep the maybe a more open tone, and you want to use particular kinds of words and so on, and that we can discuss things in a more private sphere, let's say. So I would like to invite you to, if you have questions or you want to be very sort of long-winded about it. I don't mean it in a negative way. I very much appreciate those who want to spend time on doing philosophy. Keep doing that, please, right? But maybe just venture into the Discord board where we really can take care of it, right? Together. In the we, and the dangerous we. Okay, so there aren't that many questions actually, but then I might spend a little more time on the questions than just, give a quick answer and then on to the next one, right? I used to sub on a philosophy dude from Britain called Kane B, who's kind of a sort of a academic new. He has been doing his philosophy show on YouTube while he has been studying philosophy, and I think he has sort of got his degree or whatever. And he's very nerdy about it, and very sort of a lecture kind of dude. He will fit into academia perfectly, right? He's sort of also this sort of half weird character to some extent, right? Used to have a neck beard, for instance, right? So people with a neck beard, right? You have to be careful. Okay, but my point was that he has made a few of these Ask Me Anything, and it's 100 questions, and one question is more crazy than the other one. Something like, "What is your favorite kind of food?" Or something. I mean, I don't mind answering these questions, but I would prefer it to be sort of having a philosophical angle, right? So who cares what kind of food I eat, right? So okay, the first one is an obvious one to take first, which is Idealist Biker, who asks, "What was it, generally speaking, that initially piqued your interest in these topics?" And I take that as generally some philosophical topics, right? "Have you always been interested in them? By the way, in case you're wondering, these topics I meant," and then he explains, "is meant to refer to metaphysics, ontology, philosophy, epistemology, etc." So basically everything under the hood, right? Okay, so this could be sort of a long one, right? And I'm for those of you who understand Danish, I can commend that you go back in time on my channel and find something that is called Down the Rabbit Hole in English, but Ned i kaninhullet, tror jeg kaldte det serien, 6-7 år tilbage, hvor jeg i 12-13 afsnit fortæller hele den her historie om, hvordan jeg, du ved, excuse me, I switched to English, where I explain how I sort of fell down the rabbit hole, and one thing took the other and so on, very meticulously. I don't even know why I did that, but get it off my chest, right? But to sort of shortly reiterate that, it was very slow awakening, right? Which I take as both a strength and a weakness when it comes to my way of doing things, right? I always considered myself, way back, right, as somebody who could take on a new idea or, was flexible and could understand, but without realizing that, I now understand that I had some aspects where I was completely or almost completely ignorant, right? And I think that has to do with childhood and upbringing, and you're just, go along to get along, and you just have to fit in, and all these things, all the bullshit in schools and parenting, and that sort of condenses you into being in a certain way. And handling your everyday and association with other people in order to, you don't want to be annoying, then you're scaring people away, but you don't want to be overburdening other with your presence. So you're sort of all this fitting in bullshit, right? And I think that while you're doing this fitting in, you're getting yourself used to thinking of various stuff in a certain way that you have no fucking philosophical background for doing, right? But because they become part of the story you tell yourself and so on, it's like it has become a reality for you, right? And I think that's also why some people, when you discuss certain aspects, they react very strongly, because you're basically poking and this thing that they have just basically created in their mind to go along and get along and go along, right? And you're basically challenging that implicitly by asking questions, right? That's why, Socrates was killed and so on, right? This part of me, or my mind, that, or my, psychology, whatever you want to call it, that wasn't dealt with, possibly was that which started to poke at me in the back of my head and back of my mind. There's things here and there, and it's like that if you put a lid on, right, on cold water, the lid won't go up or pop off, right? But if you start to give it some heat and fire, at some point the lid will pop off, right? And I think that's sort of the an analogy that. Get a little hint there, a little change here, and a little, what the hell is that there, and so on. And the lid started to, at some point, the lid came off, and it was like, I have to take care of this, sort of. And it's going from being subconscious to actually being conscious about your whole being, so to say, right? And I think that it's a set of things that, in my personal case, was change. I think it started changing when I had my son. That's 20 years ago now, right? It started slowly changing me. Just something sort of slightly changing me, and since he was mentally handicapped and so on, that was sort of it was a completely different world from what I had previously experienced, right? So that was sort of a knock to the head, you could say, right? Not that but it was a sort of half traumatic experience in a sense, right? For various reasons we don't need to go into, right? It's not really important. Just that I think that it sort of stirred the the saucepan a bit, right? And then it's just like, I think it's not like, okay, you're 18 years old, now you're a grown up, and then it's sort of a plateau that you're just grown up for the rest of your life. In my particular case, I think I've always been curious. I've always been interested in understanding and getting insights, except for these particular areas where I sort of have put the lid on, right? So, but at some point, when you start to ask questions, that is very close to this casserole where the lid may come off at some point, right? then I sort of, that's interesting. There's something here that I kept sort of, closing in on the sort of my own problems, so to say, problems, quote, right? I started to get some urges, I remember very strongly, to travel around the world. And I don't know where the hell that came from, because I always liked traveling, right? But this kind of, I want to do it on my own. I want to travel around the world, and I was sort of imagining how to go about doing that, right? And but I didn't think sort of, it was just like, okay, that's an interesting thought, right? I didn't sort of go deeper and say, why the hell are you starting to think about that, right? That's just sort of out of the blue, right? And that sort of late in the second half of the 2000s, right? Around 2007, there was the housing crisis, right? And at that point, we were sort of interested in we had a summer house, and we started talking about buying a house and so on. And then all of a sudden, this housing crash and I was sort of, that's weird. Why does that happen, right? 1 year everybody's buying everything, and they're talking about how many millions they have, right? And the next year everybody's selling, right? Nobody's interested in houses anymore, right? They are all selling the shit. So I was like, what the hell is going on, man, right? And I think this just sort of started, there's something about economics or something like that I don't understand, right? So it sort of sat there in the back of my mind, right? Then I got interested in art, more sort of interested going into art, and particular photography. I watched a documentary called The Genius of Photography, which is a BBC documentary, which is a sort of 6-hour series that is decently good, right? It was very inspiring for me. And this thing that you could, I have to put in some juice on my laptop here before it closes down. Oh yeah, saved by the bell. And I was like, I always been interested in photography, but when you go on when there's something, there's a birthday or, funeral or summer vacation, something, bring along the camera, photograph the children and so on. Right? I always like to do that, but nothing other than that. But this documentary didn't show the history of photography, but the artistry of photography and how you can use photography in an artistic fashion. And it didn't really occur to me. I remember having seen a documentary about Magnum years back in the 90s, right? But that was photojournalism, right? And that was sort of those who go out in the hot zones of the world and photograph wars and so on, right? Robert Capa and these guys, right? But then I found out there are actually a whole slew of artists who use photography to create artistic expression. That really, peaked. I don't know what it was, but it was, I have this sort of artistic, I've always been interested in music and so on. I like to go to, I look at art, paintings and so drawings. And I always interested in photography. And this sort of, something triggered in me. I want to go and do that. This thing that you could have a camera, you could go out into the world, step out your door and snap a shot, and it could be basically the greatest artistic expression the world had ever seen, right? Or at least within photography. That sort of this instant art rather than a painting where you have meticulously put colors together, right? This thing that you could just by being looking and framing and then take the shot, right? That was, and I started to do street photography. I bought myself a DSLR, a single lens digital single lens reflex camera, Canon 20D or something like that, or 30D. I don't remember exactly. I actually think it was a 10D. Come to think of it, and then I found out that's too old. I need a better one, so that I got a 40D, right? But it's a bit of a time back. Right now, I think it's 80D or something. Never mind. And I started to take some, and I actually felt I'm pretty good at this, right? I like this kind of artistic expression, and I like this sort of. I was very inspired by a guy called Henri Cartier-Bresson, which is a very famous French street photographer and photojournalist, who also was a part of. He actually basically started that Magnum group, including Robert Capa I mentioned before, and I am still very inspired by his approach to photography. It was like, wow, that's fascinating, man. I want to do that, right? And it sort of opened up various sort of corners of myself I hadn't explored, right? And I think this is interesting. I could do this and I could do that, changing my, I also remember that, just as a side note, there were certain situations where I was in discussion with other people, or where I started to realize, I think I started to realize, people don't know shit about what they're talking about, man. They're just spouting whatever they feel like, right? Hey, this ice cream is the best because I like it. I like strawberry ice cream, so strawberry ice cream is the best ice cream. So this kind of argument, that was sort of, I'm just giving that as an example, right? But I remember that was this is where I sort of, people are kind of fucking stupid, man, right? And it was it slowly dawned on me, very slowly. I'm thick-skulled, not as much anymore, but I have a certain level of don't get too carried away. But as I said, I had children, and in 2008 I got a daughter, and she's sort of normal, let's say, right? And at that point, I stopped smoking. I had smoking for more than a decade, right? I changed my approach to. I had two children. And a child, I could actually really communicate in a normal fashion rather than with my mentally handicapped son. And this sort of also changed my approach. I have to communicate with this child very deeply, right? And I sort of I got a sense that I have to improve some of the, also maybe things that I, when I brought up my son, I wanted to change maybe, and not that I was a bad father or anything like that. I don't think I was. There will always be things that I can improve, right? But all this sort of, all my preconceived ideas of how to do things cannot be based on these idiots who do know what the fuck they're talking about, right? So where do I go to figure this out? I started to think for myself and looking up, and these people say this and these people say that and so on, right? Then in around 2010, I had a short fling. There was a change in government, and it was the communists, socialists who got the power, right? And I was like, these bandits, right? And they were particularly nasty, this team, right? And I sort of started to go into politics, very quickly realizing these politicians and people dealing in politics, they're basically, narcissists and psychopaths, right? I mean, all people who go, I went into it because I had great ideals, right? Oh yeah, and this needs to be changed because I have ideals, right? I'm the idealized. I'm the idealist in that sense, right? But what I met was people who wanted to get something for themselves, right? Or who was very, I know this guy and you know that guy, and in politics, and this guy said, and that guy. It's like, fuck off, man, right? And I went out as quickly as I came in from that politics, and I've never looked back at it since, right? And then also the social media, right? You at some point after this politics fling, there were certain people I got in contact with who had a completely different approach, sort of very conservative in a sense, you could say, right? Libertarian and anarchist even, right? And these were kind of new ideas to me, right? I've never heard anything like that before, right? That was sort of a spin-off from social media. And I sort of, though some of these posts that people came up with, I sort of, that's interesting. And first time I heard about the Federal Reserve, for instance, right? And it was the Federal Reserve, yeah, those who print all the money. Print the money? Well, what do you mean? I was shocked, the ignorance I was living in, right? And I think that what really got me going was this thing about economics. I wanted, or based on that housing crash I mentioned before, I wanted to understand economics better, right? And I remember very clearly that one guy pointed me to a video by somebody you might know him, Tom Woods, who's sort of, within Austrian economics and the Mises Institute. He's famous there, right? And I listened to one of his videos, and he explained the housing crash, right? And why? And it was sort of completely out of left field. It was like, of course this is an explanation, right? It was like, how could I be so stupid? And why don't I know these things? These are simple things, man, right? Everybody should know how this works, right? Why haven't anybody told me, right? And I started to be very critical about what people told me. And the people around me, my family and so on, when I started to discuss these things, they were like, hey, stop, right? It's like, why? Aren't you interested in understanding things? Well, not really. They weren't interested in understanding anything. They wanted to make their ideas of how things were running the idea or the explanation of things, right? They didn't want to go deeper, right? I started to listening to podcasts, which sort of was around 2010, had become popular, right? Following, the iPod and the iPhone and sort of in the mid-2000s, right? And I listened to Peter Schiff, which also, a spin-off from economics. And some point around 2011 or 2012, I stumbled upon Stefan Molyneux in one of these Peter Schiff podcasts. And he explained about philosophy. He talked about it sort of more, I don't remember the exact podcast and so on, right? But I was so close to philosophy in a sense you could say that he blew the lid off for me, right? Now I'm not saying that he's a good philosopher necessarily. I've been very critical of him in the recent years, right? But back then I was completely blue pilled regarding this. So when I realized by listening to 3 or 4 of these podcasts with him, and I went to his show and listened to some of his podcasts, at some point it dawned on me, philosophy is what I need to do, right? And it was like I just wiped the slate clean. I at some point I said to myself, I don't take anything at face value, right? If I can't think my way to it myself, I have to reject it, right? If I can't think it, why would I trust somebody else to think it for me? If I can't think it myself, then I wouldn't be able to think. I wouldn't be able to judge whether or not other people were able to think that which I couldn't think myself. So it always points back to yourself, right? You have to do the philosophy. That's the realization that sort of started the ball rolling. And then, and all sorts of shit happened the family was destroyed by my spouse, right? I started to be inquisitive towards my friends, right? They ran away, basically, right? I was sort of halfway ostracized from job situations, and I become a little more careful with what I discuss with whom, right? Because this is sort of explosive to talk about reality and philosophy and, stating the obvious, right? And that might be a sort of a half segue into the next thing the next question, right? So it's just started the ball rolling. And in 2015, I was starting my own business, a secondhand record store in Copenhagen. And at the same time, and at that point, I had to drive, across, a drive for 45 minutes each way and so on. And I thought maybe I will just share my thoughts on YouTube, just like I've seen some other guys do, like not least Stefan Molyneux. So I started my own channel, and I was a man in a car, right? So, and in Danish that is Mandibil, man in car, it means, right? So I called it Mandibil, which is man in car, right? And then you have the rest. You can sort of go and listen to it, right? At least in Danish in the first years. Yeah. In the last 2 or 3 years, I've been doing it. The last 2 years in English only, right? So sort of to upgrade to a broader audience, you could say, right? And now I have a full amount of subs at 233 the last time I looked. So that is, thank you very much for subbing, all you who have arrived here in the later years, and all those who have stayed around. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for staying around. This is not your average pop philosophy channel. I go deep sometimes, and I'm not afraid to say things the way I say them. So I hope that Idealist Biker, that is sufficient for you to sort of get an idea where I'm coming from, right? Okay, next question is from Mr. Cashual, and I've translated this from Danish. And he says, I would love to hear your take on why times are so depressing. From movies, entertainment, and art to political correctness, money and businesses have to close. Why does this all feel like a big joke? Well, it's sort of... I understand the question, I think. It's sort of hidden in there, right? And the short answer is really, in my opinion, government and monetary system, right? It's government and banking. That's ultimately where the problems come from. But you could say government and monetary system is, to some extent, also an expression of how people are and how they're thinking and how they're brought up and how they're treated as children and so on. That becomes a part. If you're treated like your parents are authoritarian, then you expect there to be an authority when you grow up to tell you what to do, right? If you've been treated like you can think for yourself, you're not interested in a government, right? So government is an expression of how children are brought up in you could say, right? But then when children grow up and want government, then that government is going to create more need for more government, you could say, right? So it's this spiral, this evil spiral that... Evil, I don't like this, but what's it called in Danish? I have the words in Danish. Downward spiral, I think it's called, right? Where it's sort of it's self-catalyzes, right? Where more government creates more authoritarian parenting and more destroyed families. That creates more need for government that is going to impose. At some point, they're going to say, you take this injection or you won't get your money or something like that. Just as we have now, right? At least in some parts of the world, and Denmark is certainly close, right? And people don't know their asshole from their head, right? And they're sort of begging the government to be... It's like complying into freedom, right? Yes, if I comply with the government, I'm going to get more freedom. No, you're not. There's an old saying. I don't remember the quote exactly, but if you don't respect freedom but want control, you will get more control or not. I don't remember. I'm paraphrasing here. I'm sorry. I forget that. But it's like you have to take responsibility for your own life. That is part of what it means to be free, right? But if you don't want to take responsibility or be free, you need a government to do things for you, right? And government need people to be dependent. So the government is creating more dependency, right? And mostly and in particular, women become dependent on government. I mean, everything in the government is basically taking care of women, right? From the particularly when they get their first child, right? It has to be in daycare. It has to be, somebody, a nurse from the government, and daycare and kindergarten and school and universities and abortions and who knows, but everything is basically to take care of women, right? Have they created a scenario where their brothers and their sons won't get killed in wars? No. They are not concentrated on that, but they want their fucking abortions, right? They want their daycares and they want all that shit that they can get for themselves, right? It's an appeal to female vanity and female fear and so on, right? It's just vote buying and all this shit, right? And then those people we are actually stealing from, right? They have to be demonized so that we can sort of feel safe in stealing their money. So who are the most productive from a sex, a gender and race point of view? It's the white males. So the white males are being demonized into the ground, right? Because they're the one creating all the value, and that's what everybody has want to steal, right? Using the government. So this kind of dependency of government and the monetary system that is put together so that we are kept poor, right? And people are infighting. All this creates all this gumbo of bullshit that basically destroys any will to be creative or stand up and say, hey, I've created a new movie that is very different from everything else. No, they all fall in line to make sure that they don't offend anybody, because everybody's on their toes to, hey, you said something wrong there, and you're mansplaining and whatever, right? I think that's the answer, that entertainment and political correctness and businesses have to close. I mean, it follows from the monetary system, right? People are taxed into it. I mean, I started my business almost 10 years ago, 8 years ago, right? And you have no idea how expensive it is to just run a small business, right? It's ridiculously expensive, The rent is expensive, the electricity, the heating, transportation, parking. I couldn't park my car close to my shop. I had to park it away because there was, parking zones, and it's so fucking cumbersome to do businesses. And if they create sort of a pandemic, right, then all the customers sit at home and don't go to my coffee shop or whatever. I have to close down. The government don't care. They get their fucking tax money anyway, right? So it all comes back to, and maybe you could say it goes further down, but it gets to parenting, right? It's parenting in the end that is the root cause, right? And who controls parenting now? Well, women, right? Because they kick out the father of the family in 50% of the cases, right? So it's and the rest of them, there's just beta males who do what they're told, right? So the hand that rocks the cradle, right? Okay. Next question is from B. Lawrence M. And is also translated from Danish. And he says or asks, have you thought about the ChatGPT and the impact on the world we perceive or will perceive? Well, I haven't. It's not something that is on my mind, so to say, ChatGPT, but it has to do with that you can create robots basically that you're chatting with, and you think it's basically a human being, something like that, right? So it's an old problem that was formulated by Alan Turing, which was sort of a pioneer of computing and code breaking during the Second World War, right? And into the 50s and 60s, I believe. And he formulated this test called the Turing test, where I don't remember the details, but it's basically a test you can do to figure out whether or not you're talking to a computer or a human being, right? And at some point, the computers may become so advanced that you can no longer figure out whether or not it's actually a computer or a human being you're talking to, right? Just like these deep fakes, you can't, at some point you can't, you can fake the voice and you can fake the face and so on. Right? At some point you don't no longer know whether or not your master is actually the master talking or he's dead somewhere in a corner and you're just creating something on the computer screen to tell you how to do things, right? I don't believe any shit in politics. I keep as far out of politics as I can, right? And I'm not. I'm fairly good at pinpointing whether or not there's what kind of type of person is behind the comments and so on, right? So I'm not too worried about this, but it might be something that sort of comes up, and you use the term perceive. Now this is a translation, so I don't remember the actual Danish term you used, but Google says you said about how we would perceive or will perceive, right? Perception is an experience that is based on your senses, right? So your senses is not that which understands the chat. That is an interpretation. So you're the one interpreting your experiences. So it points to you being the person. You're an individual. You take responsibility, right? It's not about what do we do about this problem. It always ends up being an appeal to authorities, which is government, right? So just be careful that, and people in government and politicians, they are so good at creating these problems that you cannot fix yourself, right? It always ends up becoming, okay, then therefore government has to take care of it, right? Right? Take your injections because we know there's a pandemic. Because somebody told us, right? You have to think for yourself. And if there's a problem, you need to deal with it, right? You need to understand the problem, how to deal with it. Figure it out. Figure out a way to deal with it, right? Or don't deal with it at all. Get away from it, right? If it's toxic or manipulative, don't do it, right? Do something else. Meet a real person in real life. Talk to that person instead, right? You don't need to chat with anybody on any social platform or technological platform of any kind. I mean, you could say you're maybe forced to talk to somebody from the government, right? But whether or not that's a robot or a real person, I don't see much of a difference, right? They're basically brainwashed idiots anyway, those who work for the government, right? So I don't know if that's a sufficiently. I mean, we might want to deal with this at a later date, and maybe I will. I haven't spent too much thinking on it, right? So I might come up with something better on later. So I may get back to this question, Lawrence. So thank you for jumping in. It's been a long time since I heard from you last time, so thank you for sticking to it. Okay, so a new guy called Robert Roest came up recently, and he was very, very elaborate on his comments and so on. And thank you very much for that. It's nice to see that there's also these kinds of people who are very, very, very into philosophy, right? So sometimes I'm kind of knocked back in the sort of stream of comments, right? But thank you for that anyway. And I have copy-pasted this from a longer discussion, but I might want to take it on here, right? So Robert Roest writes, and this is with reference to the Bernardo Kastrup Analytic Idealism deconstruction that I did. And these are from some comments from this series that he wrote on YouTube, right? That Robert Roest wrote on YouTube. He says, one of the questions I had about his mind at large was this. If that mind at large is pure consciousness, pure undivided subjectivity, whatever that means, and has not evolved senses, or it has senses, maybe not physical ones, but suppose it has hearing, sight, smell, touch, and taste. What is there to hear? See, smell, touch, and taste. What the hell is that mind at large conscious of? We are always conscious of something, either things that we experience as outside, trees, elephants, clouds. At large seems to me similar as me being born in a sensory deprivation chamber. What would it be like to have no smell, no hearing, no sight, no taste, no touch? What the hell would I be conscious of? Conscious of consciousness? Aware of being aware? What does that even mean? I thought this was somewhat accounted for by mystics who claim to have experienced pure awareness. Be careful with mystics. But now I'm just not sure. Maybe it is really a big problem for Kastrup's philosophy. What do you think? Well, yes, I think it's a big problem. And you actually get to a very important point here, right? In my opinion, a very core. It's you're drilling down to the basics. He is sort of living in this singularity of mind. And to be perfectly honest and rigid about it, in my opinion, mind explains nothing. Right? It's like saying, I'm in living room, right? So now you know everything. I'm in living room. All right, this is just a term, right? What color does living room, what sound does living room have? No, that's just a category I have created. I'm just taking everything that I have access to and calling it living room, right? It doesn't explain anything. But it sounds like I'm creating a very simple and parsimonious description of my experience by creating this one thing called living room, right? And what he says also, there's something on the walls of this living room. I can't change it. It's just, colors and sounds and, and I think these are representations of something that is beyond my living room, right? And then he says, I have to think about what that might be out there, right? He says, it's also living room, right? Everything is living room. That's fucking stupid, man, right? That's ridiculous. Now, his argument is because he doesn't bring anything in new, because he's still saying living room, he gets to say that it's living room, right? He doesn't get to do that. Because he's dissociated from it, obviously, because he's deriving it from this experience on the walls, so to say, right? So since they are experiences on the wall, they cannot be that which he's describing. But he got the idea that there's something beyond the experiences on the wall because of what is on the wall, not because of what is out there, right? So because he calls everything that is in on his side living room, he says that everything is living room, or to stay with his term, because he's in mind, everything is mind, right? He is circle jerking his own concepts and ideas and models and so on into saying, well, I guess it's a mind out there, right? And then he calls it mind at last. And because it can only be one thing, then it is pure subjectivity, because he has subjectivity. So if it's the same thing out there, it must also be subjectivity. So it's everything is subjectivity, right? Though at some point, he has referred to something he calls objectivity. So he has never clarified what he means by both, right? So there are so many holes in his description of this metaphysics of his, right? So the trick is, he's saying, because I'm sitting in a living room and I have an idea there's something beyond my living room, it's also living room out there, right? Bullshit. And all these descriptions he is creating is all based on this idea that he can go and say that's also living room out there. So because there are living rooms, there might be, because I can experience on my side here as Bernardo Kastrup, I can experience ripples, right? So there can be ripples out there also, because I have ripples in here and it's also mind out there, so there can be ripples out there. But ripples are interpretation of experiences, right? So why should interpretations on your experiential side be something that is also on the other side, right? It can't work. It can't work that way, right? That's why I will always say, you can't get to it, and you should leave the fuck alone, right? I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm saying I'm leaving it the fuck alone, right? I'm not going and fabulating about what might be beyond my experiences, because all I have access to is my experiences and what I derive from those experiences. And those derivatives, why would they have anything to do with what is beyond my experiences, right? Because that entity within my mind that derives, makes those derivatives, have never experienced that outside. It has only got it through the experiences, which is not the outside, right? So I get a little carried away here, but you are on the right track here, right? Because you, with this Bernardo Kastrup metaphysics, at some point you lose complete contact with everything, right? You cannot argue yourself there by your experiences. And that's why he knocks himself out with all these descriptions, because you have to leave your experiences behind to go there. And that's what he wants, because if you have to bring your experiences along, you can experience whether or not what he says is actually the case or not. But by staying in concepts and ideas, he can throw around whatever he wants, right? Okay. So, but, thank God that you are woken up and sort of being able to criticize him, right? And then maybe that's a knockback to my description of my falling into the rabbit hole, which I'm still falling through the rabbit hole, you could say. I just thought that the lowest level was way higher, and then I fell a bit more, and I fell a bit more, and keep falling, right? And sort of, no, I can go deeper than that, I can go deeper than that, but I can't go there, right? So it's also this, as I pointed out several times, generally people don't like to shut off an area and say, I can't go there. I can never, whatever I label or any description of any kind I can put on it is based on my experiences, on the derivatives from my experiences, which is not on that side, right? It's hard to leave it alone. It's so tempting to go and say, I think it's this, or I think it's something like that. And right? So, but also, as you point out, what would subjectivity be? Because subjectivity is what that thing goes on your side of that experience, you would say, right? So he's just saying that this living room out there, there's, subjectivity out there, right? But subjectivity only arose because there was an experience on your side of things, right? So is the mind out there subjectively aware of all subjectivity? What would that be, right? As you rightfully ask, and you challenge him, right? Challenge the guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You think he does, right? He's just circumventing the experiences, right? Because that's the only measure stick you have for checking whether or not something is a claim that can be substantiated, right? That's why I would always say the reduction base has to be your experiences, which is the qualia, sounds, colors, taste, and so on, right? If you can't bring that along to check, well, in a string of arguments, right? And axioms and definitions, so back to the reduction base, then it's bullshit, right? They're bullshitting you, right? Okay. The last question is from, well, I don't know exactly how to express, but triangle space introvert. Let's just say introvert. The question is, can you elaborate on the topic of deconstruction? What do you mean by it? Especially, when do you put that word in your titles instead of words like critique or analysis, which is not quite the same? Do you refer to Derrida, or are you using some casual way? I have no clue about Derrida, right? It's my own use of the word. I have there's no connotations of any kind. What I do when I deconstruct is, and what I mean by using I am not reacting, right? It's not a reaction video. Maybe, though it might be to some extent when you listen to it, right? But deconstruction is, instead of making a short video where I say, well, in this 1.5 hour video on this series, this guy or girl is presenting this as this. Then I'm bringing in my interpretation, which I then try to pull down using my, whatever critique, right? That would very easily be classified as a straw man argument, right? I am creating my own version of the argument and I'm pulling that down, right? That could very easily become a strawman argument. So what I do is I take it sentence by sentence, right? Basically. Sentence by sentence, drawing by drawing, and so on, right? So the deconstruction is that I look basically at each word and how the sentences are constructed and how the definitions hang together. And why is this term used here rather than over there, and so on, right? If you're condensing a whole show or a whole presentation of philosophy, then you're starting to use your own description of what this philosophy is, and then you're creating the potential strawman, right? So by directing relating to each word and each sentence, you are deconstructing the philosophy, the closest you can do to a deconstruction of the philosophy, in the sense that you are challenging the cohesiveness of the philosophy. If the philosophy isn't coherent, why would I take it seriously, right? There might be something I say, okay, this is somebody who's not well trained or don't know how to argue. There might be something promising there, right? But if it starts to be sort of manipulative and Stephen Molyneux and sophistry and so on, right? It's like I can point it out by deconstructing it. But if I just said, well, Stephen Molyneux presented this argument in his presentation, and now I'm going to pull it down, then I am pulling down my own description of his, right, rather than his direct philosophy. So that's why I'm doing deconstruction, because I want to, right? I want to understand the deepest level of this philosophy, as it's presented at least, right? Because I can't know what the hell was going on in the mind. There might be a discrepancy between how, if you think about, sometimes when you see a presentation somebody made, some people are better at doing presentations, PowerPoint and so on, than others, right? Then it's clearly that they themselves understand very well what they are presenting, but the way they're presenting it doesn't come across to you as something that is easily digestible, right? It's the problem of, how do you present something to make sure that the understanding of the receiver is in complete alignment with how you understand it as a presenter, is the problem, or the minds that, it surfaces when you're doing presentations. So it's the general census is, well, I understand it, I wrote it, so it must be in one-to-one with the understanding, right? It isn't. It's very difficult, right? That's why good philosophy is hard to come by, because it's hard to know whether or not what you're reading is actually in alignment with what that person actually thinks, right? And if there's also problems with definitions and axioms and equivocations of words and so on, it's basically dysfunctional, right? And that's why you have to go down sentence by sentence, word by word, and so on, right? Okay. I think that was it. I hope it was interesting, and I'm looking forward to do another Ask Me Anything a month or 2 or 3 from now. So don't hesitate to bring on the questions. I will gladly answer them the best I can. And hope to see you in the next one. Oh yeah, and please share, like, and subscribe and all the good stuff. Consider donations. Link below or in the Discord board how to give a donation. So thank you very much. See you in the next one.